When did the trigger warnings, when did the safe spaces, when did all this emerge?
Well, it has its roots in the student radicalism of the 1960s, especially the far left radicalism. It really popped up in the 1990s, in the early 90s, when I was teaching in the U.S. at that point. And
which university?
I taught at Harvard from 93 to 98. And there was a fair push for political correctness, especially in the early part of the 90s. But it got pushed back down and disappeared and went underground. It went underground is more accurate. And then it's just come back with a vengeance in the last 5 years. And I think it's partly because we have all these radical left political activist departments at the universities, women's studies being at the top of the list, that have done nothing for the last 30 years. It's even longer than that now. It's almost 40 years, 30 years, let's say, have done nothing but produce a never-ending stream of ideologically minded counter-civilization political activists. And that's all subsidized by tuition and by the public purse. And that's another thing we really got to ask ourselves, is why the hell are we subsidizing revolution? Why are we doing that? It's crazy. And it's dangerous. It's dangerous.
So what exactly is going on with women's studies that you believe is fostering revolution?
Well, you go on their websites and read what they say. I mean, first of all, for the women's studies types, and this is, what would you call it, false anthropology. There's this idea that way back when there was a feminist paradise, and that would be like noble savage mode of living where everything was egalitarian and women dominated. It was a matriarchal culture. And that was put forward by a UCLA anthropologist named Gembutes. I can never pronounce her name properly, but I think I got it. And then that was overthrown by patriarchal institutions, essentially starting at about the time, say, of Judaism. And that was all overthrown, and ever since then we've lived in an oppressive patriarchy. And now that's what our culture is. It's an oppressive patriarchy.
So they're pointing to one unsuccessful society that they believe existed, or did it actually exist?
No, it didn't exist. There's no evidence for it whatsoever. It's complicated, but it's the telling of a kind of psychological myth as if it was history.
Whoa.
And anyway, so the basic claim is that Western civilization is a brutish patriarchy, and that whatever positive things it might have managed to accomplish were all accomplished as a consequence of oppression and theft, and that the appropriate thing to do is to restructure it from the bottom up. And they mean that. They mean that. They mean every single bloody concept. And you can marry that with modern postmodernism and throw in a nice dash of Marxism, and you have the ideological and motivated grounds for social revolution. And I'm just go online and look at a dozen women's studies websites. Just read them. You can see what they say. They produce political activists, and their goal is to restructure the patriarchy. Well, what's the patriarchy? Well, the patriarchy is Western civilization. And what does restructure mean? That's easy. It means tear it down and destroy it. Why? Because it's a brutish system that's predicated on nothing but oppression. It's nothing but a tyranny in the eyes of the radical women's studies types. Heterosexuality, that's a tyranny. Capitalism, that's a tyranny. Democracy, well, that doesn't even exist, and even if it did, it would be a tyranny. Everything's a tyranny. And so you can ask these, and what would they replace it with? They replace it with their own ideological utopia. Well, we've already had 100 years of that. We saw what happened. Oh, well, that doesn't matter. That wasn't real Marxism. That's what the bloody Marxists always say. That wasn't real Marxism. It's like, oh, how many millions of people have to die before you're convinced that it's real Marxism? And I know what they mean by that, too. They mean, hey, if I was the Marxist dictator, things would have gone a lot better. It's like, you should think again, sunshine. If you were the Marxist dictator, things wouldn't have gone a lot better. So, and if you're the sort of person that thinks that if you would have been in control, things would have gone a lot better, then you're exactly the sort of person who should never be in control. So, and it's resentment. It's horrible resentment, you know.
Well, that's an important point, because I think this is something that you've said that I absolutely agree with, that I think a lot of this thinking and the way people are behaving, it seems based on revenge. It seems based on revenge for awkward upbringings, social uncomfortability. It seems like there's something about the way they view the world where they want to get back at people that have literally done them no wrong.
It's resentment for the burden of being. It's deeper. It's deeper. I mean, human existence is characterized by a fair bit of suffering. You know, we're limited creatures and life is very hard. Everyone dies. Everyone you love is going to die. Most of the things you do, all of the things you do will eventually fail. You know, suffering is a certainty, and it's very easy for people to become resentful about being, about existence. You know, these kids who shoot up high schools and these mass shooters, they're the perfect examples of people who run on nothing but resentment. They're out to kill the innocent because that's the best marker of, that's the best way of showing just how much contempt they have for existence itself. Why punish the guilty? They deserve to be punished. It's a lot more malevolent and vengeful to punish the innocent. It's like people are motivated to a great degree by resentment of being. And a huge chunk of that is manifested in, that's the dark side of ideological possession. So I get to decide who my enemies are, and then I get to go after them, and I can go after them for every single thing that's ever been done to me that isn't good. And well, a lot of that's just built into the structure of existence.
Then they group up. They exhibit confirmation bias. They all form some sort of a groupthink, and then they act accordingly. And this is what you've been warning against, and this is where I completely agree with you, and this is why I think the subject is so important, and I love the way you've outlined all the steps and the problems with Marxism and ideologies in general, that we are dealing with this. These are the beginning steps of it, and people who look at it now and they say it's social change, it's social justice. It's not. It's not.
It's not. That's right. It's not. And this is not going to improve things. Implementing these policies will make things worse. They've made things worse every single place they've ever been implemented. And often they've made things so much worse that you actually can't imagine it. And people don't do the reading. I've done the reading. I've done the reading. I know how bad things can get. They can get so bad that no matter how bad you think they are, you're not even in the bloody ballpark.
Well, it's just so strange that these sort of courses and these sort of ideologies are thriving in universities. And it's really disconcerting to someone who has children. And you know that your children are going to go there and they're going to be exposed to these ideas.
You know, I think that...
Wow.
I think
a
that
guy who used to teach at Harvard just says send him to trade school.
I think the universities... I think you can make a reasonable case that the universities do more harm than good now. I hate to say that.
Well, this is a strange time where access to information is so incredibly easy. You could educate yourself seemingly endlessly online, and with books, and just there's so much information available. This is not the 1930s. It's not a time where it was difficult to get an education outside of a university.
The universities may have, the university, which is like the repository of human wisdom, and the attempt to expand that may have already moved outside the universities. You know, just because an institution calls itself a university doesn't mean it is. And many disciplines have turned into ideological factories. And so where's the university? I mean, the university is where anyone wants to learn about their culture and where anyone wants to expand the domain of human competence. And a lot of that's happening online now. So maybe that's the future. The only thing the universities have now, I think, that people can't get elsewhere is accreditation. But they're doing everything they can as fast as possible to make their accreditation valueless anyways. So, yeah, it's a terrible thing to say that the universities may do more harm than good. And I haven't come to that conclusion lightly.
Well, I hate
to say it.
I'm sure you do. There's also a gigantic financial stake, the amount of money that you're...
Well, and this is especially the case in the U.S. I mean, one of the things that's happened over the last 30 years is that the proportion of university expenditures that's gone to the administration has massively, massively increased. And at the same time, the student loan burden has increased. And so what's happened in a weird sense is that the administrators have conspired to steal the future earnings of their students. And then you can't declare bankruptcy. So to me, it's indentured servitude.
Well, you can't declare bankruptcy on student loans.
Right.
That's a very important distinction.
That's right. You cannot declare bankruptcy on student loans. So you think about that. You tell me what difference there is between that and indentured servitude.
There's not much, because it's the only thing that I can even think of where that's the case.
Corporations can go bankrupt.
Right.
They
and
do it all the
individuals
time.
Individuals
Right.
can. Businesses can fail. You can be deemed incompetent or not capable of paying your debt in every other case, but not with universities.
Yep, right.
That is
Right.
crazy.
It is crazy.
It's crazy because they were just trying to combat the issue where so many kids were defaulting on their student loans. They try to make you perpetually responsible for it, or the idea is that these kids have to learn responsibility. Is that the way to do it? By overcharging them for some useless
Well, I would
education?
also say that it's not a particularly useful to burden your citizenry with a massive debt as soon as they graduate, at a time when they're most likely to take entrepreneurial risks.
Yes.
You're not going to take entrepreneurial risks if you're so burdened with debt you can't get yourself off the ground.
Yeah, and we're talking about hundreds of thousands of dollars in debt with people that if you're lucky, you're going to make, what, $40,000, $50,000 a year straight out of college? If you're lucky. So you're dealing with the amount of money that you would have to make if you didn't pay any taxes or didn't have any expenses. You'd have to work for 4 or 5 years, longer than you would actually be in college to get that degree in the first place. It's insane. It's insane.
I would say, too, to the university students who are listening, like, a lot of your professors are Marxists. Ask them if they're Marxists. Read the Gulag Archipelago first, because you need to get your arguments together. And Solzhenitsyn won a Nobel Prize for that book and for his other writing, and it was one of the key. There was a couple of things that brought down the Soviet Union, but one of them was Alexander Solzhenitsyn's book, and he demolished the intellectual credibility of Marxism forever. But you have to read the damn book, and you got to get your arguments in order. And you go after your Marxist professors, ask them.
And it's a difficult book to read.
It's a very difficult book to read. It's a very difficult book, although it's difficult because it's so horrifying. It's not difficult particularly because it's impenetrable. In fact, it's an absolutely fascinating book in the same way that a terrible horror story is fascinating. But there's no excuse for this. There's no excuse for these professors who claim to be benevolent Marxists.
I think the way you framed it is very important. I think the way you framed it is them being compassionate intellectuals that are inclined toward this, because on the surface it seems like it's what a compassionate intellectual would support.
Yeah, and it's the unthinking adherence to compassion as the highest moral virtue.
And it's also,